Good morning, everybody. We're going to get straight into our 5 starter questions. They're on the screen for you now. So pause here, write down those questions and write yourself your answers. And when you're ready, press play and we'll talk through those 5 questions. Okay, so question 1 was, how is a constant speed shown on a distance time graph? Now remember, a distance time graph will have time along the bottom on the x-axis and it will have distance up the side on the y-axis. So if we have a constant speed, we will have a straight line, but it will not be a horizontal line because a horizontal line would show no change in distance. So this will be a straight line, but it will be sloping. It could either be sloping up or it could be sloping down. If it was sloping up, you'd be moving away from your starting position. And if it was sloping down, you'd be moving towards your starting position. Question 2. This is a tricky one. So true or false? The temperature changes as a pure substance melts. Now, I am pretty sure you're going to be tempted to put true, because if you're melting something, we must be heating it up. But actually, the answer is false. And the reason the answer is false is because as we add energy to a substance, we eventually reach its melting point, the temperature that it melts at. And when a substance is at its melting point, the extra energy that you're putting into that substance by adding heat is actually used by the substance to move the particles further apart and to give those particles energy. It's used up in the melting process. The temperature of that substance doesn't actually increase until it has finished melting. But that was a tricky question. So, question 3 was another true or false. Pure substances have a sharp melting temperature. Now, if we think about yesterday's questions, we had a very similar question yesterday, and we said that pure substances tend to melt at one particular temperature. If you have something that is a mixture of substances, each of those things that mixture is made up of will have its own melting point. So it will melt at a range of different temperatures. So a pure substance will have a sharp melting temperature, so that is true. Question 4 was, what is one function of a plant cell's permanent vacuole? Now, there are 2 correct answers you could put here. The more obvious one is to store substances, so starch will be stored in the vacuole, but you could also have put to keep the cell rigid, so it helps to give the cell shape. Either of those would do. And question 5, in which part of a cell would you find the chromosomes? Well, the chromosomes are part of the DNA, and that would be found in the nucleus of the cell. I'm sure you got that one correct. Well done for completing those. Correct any that you didn't get right. Give yourself a tick for the ones that you did get right. And then we're going to start off looking at today's topic, which is the nervous system. So you can put the title in your book, The Nervous System. And you can see here on the big picture, these are the things that we're going to try and cover today. We need to talk about the structure of the nervous system and look at how information is passed from receptor to the brain. And we need to look a bit more closely at each different element of the nervous system. And there are quite a few of them. There are loads and loads of keywords in today's lesson. So one of the things we're going to do as we go along is we're going to write ourselves a glossary of all the keywords. So each time there's a keyword, I'll tell you it's a keyword. You're going to write that down, and then you're going to try and write a little, very simple, one-sentence definition of what that word means. So our nervous system is made up of 2 parts. The first part of the nervous system is what's called the central nervous system, sometimes called the CNS for central nervous system, and that is simply made up of your brain, and your spinal cord. That is your central nervous system. So that's your first keyword. So write down central nervous system and put a little definition there that it's made of only your brain and your spinal cord. You might want to pause quickly whilst you do that. And the second part of your nervous system is called the peripheral nervous system, and that is your next keyword. And that is the part of your nervous system that's made up of nerves that branch off from the spinal cord and extend to all parts of your body. So make yourself a note of that as well, and press play when you're ready to move on. So let's just have a little think about the job of the nervous system. So the job of the nervous system is to basically gather information about your environment, feed that back to your brain. I like to think of your brain as a bit like a computer, which is collecting in information. It processes that information, decides what to do about it, and then it sends out information to other parts of your body so that you can respond to the environment that you're in. So if you think about your senses, you have 5 different senses, and your senses are your way of exploring and interacting with the world. So think about your skin. Your skin is what is known as a receptor organ, and that is just an organ of your body that is capable of detecting information about your surroundings. And in your skin, you have receptor cells, and those cells can detect touch. And when a receptor cell in your skin detects that you are being touched, it will send that signal to your brain, and your brain will then know that something has touched your skin. So our first keywords here for you to write down are stimulus, and a stimulus is anything that your body is sensitive to. So it could be light, touch, taste, smell, any of those things. The next one is receptor organ, and a receptor organ is things like your skin or your eyes, the actual organs of your body that do the detecting of your environment. And then we have receptor cells. These are the cells in your skin or in your eyes that actually pick up the signal and start sending a signal to your brain to tell it what you have interacted with. So you might want to just pause here whilst you write down those 3 keywords and their definitions, and then press play when you're ready. So when the receptor cells inside your receptor organs detect some sort of stimulus in the environment, they send what's called an electrical impulse to your brain, basically an electrical signal that tells your brain that something has happened. And that signal goes through a sensory neuron, which is, I like to think of it as like a wire. It's like a wire that travels from the receptor cell up to your brain. So we need to add to our keywords electrical impulses. They're just electrical signals that travel to your brain. And we have sensory neurons that connect our receptor cells to our nervous system, or to our central nervous system. So when one of your receptor organs, such as your skin, comes into contact with something in its surroundings, a stimulus, the receptor cells in that organ detect that stimulus and create electrical impulses which travel through your sensory neurons to your central nervous system via your spine, which is part of your central nervous system, up to your brain. Now, the job of your brain in this situation is to figure out what to do about the information it's just received. Your brain may then decide that your body needs to respond to the stimulus that it's detected. And the way that your body does this is that your brain will then send another electrical impulse down a neuron called a motor neuron, and that will then go and connect to what we call an effector. And an effector is normally a muscle, and that muscle will then allow you to move your arm or move your leg in response to that stimulus. Okay, so to add to your keywords, we have effector. You can put a note for yourself. That is normally a muscle. It's sometimes a gland. A motor neuron is a neuron that travels away from your central nervous system towards effectors. And then the final part is that you have a response, such as moving your arm or your leg, for example. You need to also add keyword neurotransmission. This is the travelling of the electrical impulses through the nervous system. And the time that it takes for you to respond to a stimulus is called your reaction time. And that is your last keyword for this part of the lesson. So just pause here, use that slide there to just make sure you've got all the keywords down, and then press play when you're done, and we'll look at an actual example. On the screen now we have the same information from the previous slide, but now it's been set out like a flow diagram. So what I'd like you to do, don't worry about the actual pictures themselves because they'll be quite difficult to draw unless you're very artistic. But I'd like you to copy down those blue boxes in that order and the red arrow above that shows the direction of travel. And this is our flow diagram of our nervous system. And then underneath that, we're going to write an example of where this might be used. So pause now, write out those blue boxes, make a flow diagram, and then press play when you're done. Okay, so underneath our flow diagram, we're going to write out a little story, if you like, of an example of a situation where we might use our nervous system from stimulus all the way through to response. So I'm going to give you an example of a situation where our nervous system might transmit information from stimulus all the way to response, and then you can follow that on your flow diagram that you've just drawn. So whilst I'm talking to you now, I'm also actually drinking a nice cup of tea. So the stimulus in this example will be a nice tasting cup of tea. And the receptors that would be involved in enjoying your nice cup of tea would be your taste buds on your tongue. Those are receptor cells. And my taste buds on my tongue are going to send an electrical impulse through sensory neurons in my tongue all the way to my brain. Now, when my brain receives this information, it can process that information and it can decide whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, and it can make a decision. Now, I like tea, so my brain is going to decide that me drinking a nice warm cup of tea is a good thing. And in response to that, my brain can then send another electrical impulse down a motor neuron to my face. And in my face, there are effectors, muscles. And the response that I will have to drinking my nice cup of tea will be to smile. So a little challenge for you here. I'd like you to just pause where we are now, and I'd like you to write your own little story, bullet point story of some stimulus in your surroundings that you can experience. It could be something you eat, something you touch. And I'd like you to explain the story in bullet point form all the way from stimulus to your response. So just pause now whilst you do that and press play when you're done. We're going to look a little bit closer now at the structure of a neuron, a nerve cell, in a bit more detail. So what we have on the screen here is a picture, a close-up picture of a sensory neuron, and we need to make some more notes. There's going to be some more keywords to write down so that we can understand the main parts of the neuron. So the first thing we're going to write down are dendrites, and if you look on the diagram, they look like little tree branches on the left-hand side, the dendrites, and they are the parts of the neuron that receive the impulses from the receptor cells. The next part we're going to write down is the dendron, and that is the part of the nerve cell that is between the dendrites and the cell body, The cell body is there in the middle of the cell, and that is where the nucleus of that cell is. To the right of that, we have what's called the axon, and the axon is the part of the cell that connects from the cell body to the axon terminals, which are the small branch-like structures on the right-hand side, and they pass the electrical impulses on to other neurons. So you might want to pause here, you might need to rewind even, but the key words you need to write down are dendrites, dendron, axon, and cell body. And the last thing from this slide which we need, if you look at the dendron and you look at the axon, you can just about see the nerve cell that passes through the middle. It looks like a wire going through the middle of the dendron and the axon. Now, around that nerve cell, there are 3 on each side, are what is called a myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath helps to speed up the transmission of the electrical signal along the dendron and along the axon. So write down as well, myelin sheath, its job is to speed up the transmission of the electrical signal. We can see on this slide there are some differences between sensory neurons, motor neurons, and relay neurons. And there's a diagram of each, and there is a description and an explanation there of how they differ from each other. I'm not going to read that through for you. You can pause here and read that if you want to. You might want to rewind to this slide in a minute, because your next task is to draw and label a neuron. You choose which one you want. So just go back to the previous slide and pick one of those to draw out and explain the purpose of each part of the neuron. When you have done that, if you can copy down this sentence here, part 2, fill in the gaps, copy that sentence out, and then add in the missing words from that sentence. So use the previous 2 slides to complete that task. And then when you're done, press play. Okay, so let's just talk through the sentence you've just completed there for part 2 of that task. The body has lots of sensory receptors, that should be, which detect environmental stimuli. When this happens, nervous impulses are sent along sensory neurons to the central nervous system. From the central nervous system, impulses are sent along motor neurons to effectors, which produce a response. So well done if you got all 4 of those. Right, that is our hard work done. So the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is optional. Okay, so you don't have to do this. So I'm going to ask you to do an experiment at home. You'll need someone else to help you. The instructions are here on the screen, so you might want to pause that whilst you do the experiment. So you'll need to blindfold somebody else, and you'll need to take a paper clip and you'll need to unfold the paper clip so you have 2 pointy ends that can be touching. So you have both of the pointy ends of the paper clip together. And then you're going to gently push the pointy ends of the paper clip against somebody's skin. Maybe on their arm is a good place to start. And they will detect the paper clip as one pointy end, because the 2 pointy ends are actually touching together. And then you're going to separate the pointy ends so they're slightly further apart. And what you will find is when the 2 pointed ends of the paperclip are quite close together, the other person will still feel that paperclip as one pointy end. And you keep moving them further and further apart until the person can actually feel that you are touching them with 2 pointy ends of the paperclip. You then need to repeat the experiment, and instead of using their arm, use their fingertip. Make a note of how far apart the 2 ends of the paperclip are, both on the arm and on the fingertip, when the person can detect that there are 2 ends of the paperclip and not one. And there's a couple of questions there for you to ask yourself. Which part of the body had the shortest distance? And what does this tell you about how sensitive the arm and the fingers are. Why do you think the finger is more sensitive than the upper arm? So this is an optional task, but please do feel free to email me what you find out from doing that investigation if you choose to do it. And your last task for today is to return to Go for Schools and complete the quiz about this lesson. And remember, once you submit that quiz, it automatically gets sent to me, so I will know that you've actually completed the quiz. Well done for your work today. As always, if you've got any problems at all with the work, if there's anything you want me to help you with further or anything that you don't understand, please just drop me an email and I'll try and help you out. Okay, well done, and I will speak to you on Friday.